You're listening to WCAT Radio, your home for authentic Catholic programming.
Welcome to the Open Door. Jim Hanink here with fellow panelist Valerie Niemeyer. Our good friend Mario Ramos, a working stiff, don't you know, is caught up in a number of beginning of the semester faculty meetings, and he has our sincere condolences. Today, though, we'll be talking about what's involved for running for the Senate of the United States. What motivates a candidate to do so? What are the technical requirements? How much money does it take to run a campaign? Need serious Christians apply for the job? Our special and welcome guest is Dr. Mark Ruzon. Yes, he is a candidate for the Senate. He's also the chair of the California State Committee of the American Solidarity Party. Mark is a senior software engineer with Google, though he claims to be involved only in maps. Now, he and his family live in Mountain View, California. So let's begin as we always do in prayer. Come, Holy Spirit, fill the hearts of your faithful and kindle in them the fire of your love. Send forth your Spirit, and they shall be created, and you shall renew the face of the earth. O God, who has taught the hearts of the faithful by the light of the same Holy Spirit, grant that the Spirit may make us truly wise and lead us ever to rejoice in his consolation. We ask this through Christ our Lord. Amen. Valerie, would you like to get us launched?
Yeah, well, mostly, first off, I want to know why. Why did you do it? Why did you decide to run for the U.S. Senate?
You've been talking to his wife, haven't you? All right, go ahead.
Before I begin, I'd first like to apologize to you, Jim and Valerie, and to the audience for accidentally missing 2 weeks ago when I was first scheduled to be on the Open Door. I wish I had a great excuse. I do not. So thank you for being flexible and finding a time for me to come back and do this properly.
Well, you're back by legal demand, so we understand. Go ahead.
You for being human over the holiday season.
So the reason that I'm running for Senate is twofold. The first is that I think Democrats and Republicans have been doing a collective awful job in making America the place it's supposed to be. And if you don't do something about it, then you're just continuing to be part of the problem. And I want to be part of the solution. And I believe that the American Solidarity Party has the platform that is best suited to creating conditions in this country for the flourishing of everyone in California, as well as across our nation and extending on to the whole world. And I want to see that platform enacted in our public policy. And so it's either it's put up or shut up. The second reason is that I want to build up our party, and I can't do that if we don't have candidates for elections. And Jim and a couple other people on the California State Committee were kind enough to twist my arm only gently. And after some rumination, I decided that I would be the person to sit in the big chair and take this thing all the way through to the finish line. So here I am.
All right, now we know about the motive. How about some nuts and bolts? What's involved in getting your name on the ballot here in California?
Well, the biggest thing that's involved is patience in dealing with election officials at both the state and county level. Um, the technical requirements are not super onerous, especially for a state as big as California. I think that generally they might be a little higher here than in other places simply because we have so many people, and so you need to set a slightly higher bar than some places. Uh, you need to pay a filing fee, which is for Senate or I think or for statewide office is 2% of the first year's salary. Our senators these days make $175,000 a year. Figure that has not risen with inflation, luckily, and so the 2% of that is about $3,750. So I needed to come up with that much money, and I needed at least 65 signatures of registered voters in order to prove them not a one-person show. I managed to fulfill that requirement. In addition, the state does have a nice clause where you could pay for your entire filing fee if you could acquire 7,000 signatures. Sadly, I was not able to acquire 7,000, but if you turn in less than 7,000, you can get your filing fee reduced at a prorated amount, which is somewhat forward thinking. So I was able to have over a dozen people around the state collecting signatures on my behalf. Jim was kind enough to collect a significant number for me, and that reduced the filing fee by a detectable amount. Interesting is was dealing with the state and the bank in this matter. The state actually requires you to send them a check that is blank with a memo line that says, not to exceed $3,750. And then they look at how many signatures they have, because of course they can't seem to get them in. Can't seem to get them counted among all the counties in time to tell me. So you send them a blank check, and then they fill it in and send you a copy so that you know what it is you actually paid. And that's how electoral politics works in California. Valerie, you're muted.
I had my son bring me a cup of coffee, which was the obnoxious squeaking door noise you heard. So then I needed to mute it so it wouldn't squeak on his way out. But anyhow, it was worth it for the coffee. Sorry about that, though.
Irish coffee, an old political ploy. Go on.
So it's helpful to see kind of how you were able to get up and running. And then from here, you got a campaign. So, and a lot of people kind of have the sense that only millionaires or their friends can campaign for the Senate in America. Is that true? What's your sense?
Probably.
Successfully, anyway, I guess, huh? Yeah.
I mean, getting together a few $1,000s for the filing fee in itself is not something that probably the average American can do, not without setting up a fundraising effort. And because this is a top ticket race, we decided that we were actually going to make a fundraising effort. So I do have buttons you can press on my campaign website, which is RuzonForSenate2024.com. And yes, you have to have a lot of money. And if you look at the people who are the leading candidates in this race, a lot of them are already congressmen, and they have lots of money at their disposal, both personally and professionally. And yes, that might actually be true.
Well, I'm glad you didn't mention their names. We don't want to hear their names. We've heard their names too much because of the millions of dollars they're spending on advertising to make their names household names.
So on your campaign page, I liked the way you had kind of a fresh, brief verbiage about that kind of boiled down a lot of the principles.
No, I've got to interrupt again.
Okay, by all means.
I've got it bad this morning. Valerie, you know we don't like the word verbiage.
Really?
No, we don't like that word at all. We
Right.
feel that the word verbiage has infiltrated the language by way of tech people who only take numbers seriously and don't really care that much about language.
Okay, so let me restate that. The language, I appreciated the
Yes.
language you
For
used.
example, as I've pointed out to certain stalwarts in our party, we would never refer to the language of the American Solidarity Party platform as verbiage. We'd never do that, would we?
I wouldn't.
Oh,
I definitely won't.
go ahead. Go
I'm gonna
ahead.
have to do some learning about that. I'm gonna have to look up the
Somebody
word.
made me say that. Somebody made me go off on that rant. Go
Well,
ahead.
that's funny. Now when we get off, I'm gonna go look up the word verbiage and figure out where I went wrong. So, but the language that you used was that everyone, regardless of birth status, income, or behavior, has an inherent value and dignity. And I think it's well said. And I want to know what's your basis for affirming this claim?
Well, it is, in a sense, one of the age-old questions of our republic. Are we humans meant to govern ourselves fully, meaning that everybody should have some role in consenting to the government that we have, or should we be governed by a small group of people who know better than the rest of us what ought to be done and how? Uh, I have to come down on the side of everybody being involved. That America is at its best when all people have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, as proclaimed in our Declaration of Independence. And if you start from that point, then it very naturally leads to the assertion that we have to make public policies that work for everybody. And too many of our policies only work for select groups of people, mainly the wealthy. But there are other interest groups that have gotten a very strong chokehold on America and are preventing policies from going into effect that would help, most notably around gun control. We lose so many people every year, and this does not happen in other countries. Um, you might read about an incident once in a while, but America seems to be have something of a corner on the market for murdering groups of people, and that's not right. And if we've done anything in the history of our country, it's been to bring more and more people into the fold. We've ended slavery. We've created civil rights. We've given women the right to vote and the right to participate economically in our system. These are all good things, and yet we continue to discriminate against the group of people who is least able to defend themselves or raise their voices in protest, and that's the unborn. I don't see why we should discriminate against human beings just based on whether or not they're born or not. They might not have seen their faces yet. They might have not have a name picked out for them, but that makes them no less human. And until the dignity of every human being in America and the world is respected, we're simply not going to be the people that we could be.
It's notable that Thomas Aquinas, writing in the 1200s, in discussing law, understands law as a directive of reason ordered to the common good by whoever has care of the community. And then he goes on to say that law comes from the people, although the people can certainly choose representatives to make their voices effectively heard. So this notion of reasoned consent is right at the very center of St. Thomas's understanding of natural law and the very essence of what law is. And I think were Thomas here today, he'd say that in some way, at some level, we know this to be the case. Now, any number of people have said perhaps the main reason why the unborn are disenfranchised is that they can't make their voices directly heard. But certainly their parents and those who love them can make their voices heard. We certainly can do that. We have care of them, and in having care of them, we have care for the whole community. Let me go ahead a bit. The American Solidarity Party, because of its regard for the common good, looks for a fair and wide distribution of the goods of this life of ours. And that's why we talk about the need for economic opportunity and the need for phrase we use is an ownership society. What sorts of specific policies might advance that end?
I believe that we can especially use tax policy to influence people's behavior. There's plenty of examples of this. If you tax something, you generally get less of it. So one area where we have an ownership problem is with housing. We have too many millennials and now Generation X Zers who are unable to participate in the standard rites of passage that my generation and baby boomers have taken for granted, namely to get a job, go out and buy a house, and then get married, raise a family. This somewhat natural progression of events is being put on hold for too many because of the economic conditions that they're in. A lot of them who went to college have prodigious amounts of debt that whose consequences they might not have fully understood when they were 18, or they took a bet that they'd be able to get jobs that would pay this off and can't now. It's very hard to know when you're starting out in life what's going to happen to you, or how much money you're going to make years from now. And for most of our history, that hasn't been an issue because people have generally been able to afford a house. In the Bay Area where I live, in the 70s or 80s, let's say, the average cost of a home was roughly 3 times a person's salary. And that was an amount that, where people could take out a mortgage and buy that. make the payments. Now around here, the houses are roughly 10 times a person's salary, and that burden is causing problems. The complexities of the housing crisis are many, and as a senator, I would not be able to address all of them because a lot of it simply comes down to supply and demand factors and the roadblocks that communities put up in order to prevent housing from happening in their neighborhoods. One thing that I think we can do in terms of a distributist model is discourage people and corporations from owning lots and lots of properties. One of my proposals would be to enact a tax on such people and corporations based on the property taxes they're already paying or the assessed value of their homes, and that the rate of that tax would go up in proportion to the number of homes that they owned. So if you had, say, a summer house out in the mountains, that's a privilege, one that a lot of people don't have. So if you wanted to have that second house, you could, but you would have to pay extra for it. And by the time you got up to 3 or 4 or 5 houses, you start becoming our small real estate mogul. Then this is something we don't want to encourage. We want to discourage it. And by taxing it at a rate where it would soon become exorbitant, the net effect would be that people would have to sell off those excess houses if they didn't want to pay the taxes. And those would go to people who are struggling to find a home to buy right now. So we can increase supply and even out the numbers a little bit. There are corporations who own thousands or even tens of thousands of homes. And of course, there is a need for rentals. Not everybody wants to buy a home. But I'd much rather have somebody living in a duplex and owning the whole duplex and renting out the other half to somebody who doesn't want the burdens of ownership than have the current state that we're in. More importantly, it would be a tax where I would hope that the expected revenue would be zero, because it would mean that the people were willing to sell off those excess houses to those who are looking to have one, and in so doing, equalize our wealth distribution by a large amount.
Thanks for that. That's very specific. What
Yeah,
next, Valerie?
another area of policy I'm curious about in terms of, just where the rubber would meet the road in terms of specific policies related to the family. You believe that families are the fundamental unit of society. And so what kinds of policies do you envision where would the goalposts be in terms of policies that would strengthen families? And what is the proper role for government in a family's child rearing decisions? Also, where do you see government playing a role in?
Well, there's a couple of facts about families that when you put together, you find troubling. One is that a fairly large percentage of the abortions in this country come from women who already have children and who are presumably married and are but simply don't feel like they can afford to feed another mouth, which is a tragedy of unspeakable proportions. And yet at the same time, families have been consistently telling those who run surveys that on average they wish they had half a child more than they actually do. So people want more children, and yet we are killing the children that we have because we can't afford them. And so what we need to do in a nutshell is make things more affordable for families. I don't think that would entirely solve the tragedy of abortion, but I think it would get us a good chunk of the way there, and would put a signpost in the ground that says yes, we value families. We want to create more of them. We want them to have the number of children that they actually want to have. So childcare is a big deal since we've created a system where very often both parents have to work out of economic necessity. It's incumbent upon us to provide childcare in a form that people can actually access. That's not easy. There were it was a part of the president's um, legislative agenda that never really got off the ground. I would continue to advocate for those policies. Families need housing, as I've already mentioned, and so by increasing the supply of houses on the market, we can make housing slightly cheaper, and that would have beneficial effects for families. Healthcare is something that I'm passionate about. I want to see a system where um, that makes a lot more sense than the one that we have now. We spend like twice as much money as the number 2 country per capita in out of the entire world, and we have outcomes that are generally worse than the island of Cuba, which we've been punishing for 50 years with a trade embargo. Why are they living longer than Americans? This is and doing it obviously on a shoestring budget. So we know these things can be done. They are out there. Every other country in the world seems to be able to do it better. Um, we need to push forward to do that. And I believe in the long run that will make families healthier and also save them money, both on care they don't need and when they do need care, it can be done more cheaply.
I want to go ahead, Valerie.
No, go ahead.
I want to have we do this almost every show, a pop quiz question.
Lay it on me, Jim.
Just as the unborn aren't represented, so also, in a sense, families aren't fully represented. And at the last convention of the American Solidarity Party, a proposal was made, and a number of people thought it hadn't been discussed enough in the past to make it something to vote on then and there at the convention. It's sometimes called the Devaney approach after a fellow who's championed it. We say one man, one vote, one woman, one vote. How about one family and as many votes as there are people in the family? Or at least something close to that, so that a family of 10 would have a greater representation than, say, 2 people with no family whatsoever. And this way, family economics would have a lot more leverage than they have now. Now, this is a pop quiz question. And I don't know if you recall this, but at the National Convention, a number of people said, we don't need any pop quizzes at the convention. We should discuss this a lot before we take it into consideration. But do you have any initial thoughts on that? I think were we to take such a position, the party would seem even more distinctive than it already is.
And I would say that there's a difference between distinctive and eccentric.
That's the voice of common sense. We discourage that, but go ahead.
I'm not of the opinion that we ought to have proxy voting in our elections. I think it's I am not like 100% opposed to the idea, but I'm mostly opposed mainly on practical grounds. If we go out there with ideas that veer from just being on the radical end to just being strange ideas that nobody's even really heard of or are discussing in the public sphere. I think we're doing ourselves a disservice as a party. We also have to realize that families themselves are not unified blocks. Often husbands and wives vote differently on different issues and for different candidates. And so how you would figure out, which kid to assign to which parent, um, it gets into some very uninteresting rabbit holes that I think are best avoided with the current system where uh, parents act on behalf of their children, and when the children become of age, they can register to vote themselves. And uh,
Although they might not bother to register.
they might not. Mine have so far. I think that's good. But yeah, and the younger generation is being turned off by the process because they aren't seeing much in it for them. They're seeing a future where where money is not going to come to them. They're not going to be able to make use of the talents and the education that they have, and are going to wind up postponing again life's milestones in simply because they can't afford them. And uh, I think we can address other areas and not distinguish ourselves in a way that's going to make a lot of people say, "Huh?"
Yeah,
Well, I just wonder if Valerie wants to take even a little bit of a peek down that rabbit hole.
well, I'm thinking I have a son who just turned 18 this last year, so he'll be voting this year. I don't like the vibe that I get from just the thought of me casting a vote for him at the age of 17, 16, 15. I don't know. Families don't need more to divide them or to make kids like feel micromanaged by parents or yeah, I don't know. I mean, but at the same time, the instinct of like parents with, 6 kids have more skin in the game in terms of the direction a country takes. I mean, I can see a certain kind of a common sense in giving them their vote a little more weight somehow, but I don't think that, I think you're right. I think the proxy factor is, um, uh, practically speaking, not too many negative implications to that. I think the bigger thing is I have 6 kids. They're going to be voting people in this polity. So the best thing that families can do is raise good, strong citizens, virtuous citizens who think rightly and vote with wisdom and care for our communities, from local to global. But yeah, that's just a little thought. I agree. I think it's a bit eccentric and has some implications that won't play out as well as people might like to think.
You don't think that proportional representation should begin at home?
Oh, yeah, let's not go down that road.
Don't even want to look down that road.
Yeah. I was curious about, you talked about healthcare and how that's important to you, and you envision a medical system that covers family members from prenatal care to hospice. It's kind of where you would set the goal post. And I'm wondering how you think California could achieve, practically speaking, such a goal.
Well, I don't want that a goal to be limited only to Californians. I'd like to see all Americans be able to have affordable health care. I think a big part of the problem is that our healthcare system is fragmented. So, for instance, you will find private programs, insurance programs that simply don't cover various ailments until basically they say, well, we'll let Medicare take care of that, and so they won't cover something, but then you can get it basically for free when you turn 65. So I think the key, or one of the keys, is that people aren't really aware of costs, and the whole notion of cost in our system is so Byzantine and opaque that nobody really knows what it is. We have yeah, it's kind of mind-boggling that an insurance company can well it's not mind-boggling that insurance companies can negotiate with medical providers for costs, but you wind up with this inverted effect where if you're not insured, you often have to pay a price for the same procedure that is uh, completely out of whack um, uh, compared to somebody who actually has health insurance. So you wind up becoming penalized. And we have an employer-based health insurance system. We would never design such a system today. This is only a historical artifact that's due to some decisions that were made in the middle of the 20th century without anybody really giving them much thought. Uh, Companies need to focus on their business, not on healthcare. I don't see how that benefits them to have to hire people in their HR departments who simply deal with this all the time. I think we can save a lot just by making the pools larger. In addition, large companies don't really want to see healthcare reform because they can use the fact that they do provide coverage as a bargaining tool for getting talent to join them and then to retain them. I've worked for big companies and small companies, and yes, small companies have to have their employees pay more for premiums than large companies do because the large company has a bigger pool. They're able to average out the risk among a much larger population, and as a result, they can offer lower rates. Sorry, my cat seems to enjoy my lap when I'm sitting in front of the computer here.
Tiene el gato.
Uh, so if we put everybody in one insurance pool, regardless of how big a company you work for, or whether you work for a company at all, we'd wind up with a system that simply by notions of scale would be more efficient and effective than what we have now. So I still see a role for private insurance companies in the healthcare market. I know people like to complain about them, but the truth is that while government is very good at setting up regulations and making sure that the playing field is fair for people who are involved in a certain market, government is not very good at setting prices. And as a senator anyway, I wouldn't want every medical specialty from anesthesiologists on down to be coming to me saying, "Oh, we ought to be charging this much for procedure X." I'm not qualified to make those decisions, and neither are most of the people in the Senate today. So we would need we need somebody else to take care of that. And so by setting up exchanges at the state level, or for a state as big as California, maybe you split it into multiple regions based on geography. You put everybody in there and say that companies have, if they want to participate, they have to offer policies to everyone in that state or that region and offer them for the same price. And then we can, we can twiddle the numbers a little bit to average out if a slightly sicker population goes with company A than with company B. And at that scale, everybody now has the opportunity to purchase health insurance, and then we can get to universal health insurance simply by giving people a voucher for the lowest cost plan in their region or state. Of course, that plan would have to meet certain minimum criteria. Would have to cover preventative care, would have to cover catastrophic care, would have to cover chronic conditions, like people with diabetes, of which we have far too many in this country. But by leveling out the policies and making them larger and getting off of this employment-based system, we would see a lot of efficiencies of scale that would result in lower premiums and probably overall better care.
All right, that's a clear position. I'm not entirely convinced that it's a distributist position. It looks like a centralizing position, but of course, there's no reason not to move to the level of the state if the state, in fact, can do something much better than private groups. But let's try a different topic, equally contentious, more contentious even, immigration. I spent a lot of time in Texas, and immigration is the issue. In California, almost as much attention is given to immigration. I don't think anybody is happy with the immigration system. What measures would you propose, Mark?
Well, the New York Times had a interesting article and nice graphics showing what happened to all the people who have come here in 2023. There have been roughly 2.5 million what they call encounters between government officials, namely the Border Patrol and people arriving at ports of entry. And of those, we only managed to resolve 700,000 of those cases, either positively or negatively, most of them negatively. So we simply need to make the whole process faster by putting enough money into our immigration court system that we can process people reasonably. What happens is that since the early 2010s, the amount of time on average it takes to resolve an immigration case has increased from 8 or 9 months to 3 years. And the problem there's multiple problems there. One is that it's not really due process to drag out a decision on whether or not somebody can stay in this country. But it also means that people get lost. If we could process people in a few months, we can hand them be able to say, show up at this court on this date and time, and we'll conduct a hearing. Instead, we don't give people a date and a time. When we do manage to give them a date and a time, they show up and they participate, and they're willing to go through the system. But when it drags on for years, people just kind of get lost. And so if we want to be able to process people and make decisions fairly, we need to have enough money in our court system to fund all the judges that we need and the accompanying officials that have to accompany the judges so that we can process people. If people knew that they could get a fair shake, they'd be much more likely to come through legal ports of entry where we can process them and make a decision quickly. It's partly because of the desperation that our people are coming across the border in places that are not legal. Also, a number of our immigrants are simply people who have come into this country legally on a visa, and then when the visa expires, they don't go. So we need a better system in place for tracking people who are in this country legally, um, and make sure that when their time is up, that they are required to actually leave as they promised. I am generally in favor of immigration. I think we have always been a light to immigrants from all over the world, at least until we started to become a rich country. And immigrants have made this country a great place to be. Furthermore, there are demographic challenges that the United States, as well as other countries around the world, are facing. If we want to be able to continue to grow our population, in part to have enough workers to pay for the government that we want, we need to have people here to do that work. But at the same time, we simply cannot open up our southern border and allow people to stream across without permission. But I do believe we ought to be more lenient in granting that permission. I think that would go a long way towards convincing people to come in the front door instead of trying to sneak in. The Biden administration has increased the number of judges over the last 3 years, but we need to double the number of courts that we have. And as senator, I would advocate strongly for doing so.
Immigration takes us to the edge of international relations, and senators certainly weigh in on international relations. And we've got at least 8 minutes to cover all of that. Valerie, would you like to focus on some particular aspect of international relations?
No, because I was thinking, you said a lot of people come in out of desperation, right, to our country. And that's because their countries of origin are not being managed well, or in worst case scenarios, are places where people aren't safe. And so, if we are called to take in and welcome those folks, which, of course, our Judeo-Christian tradition does have something to say about that we do, what is our obligation as a country to get involved in the circumstances outside of our country? What is the United States role in contributing to peaceful international relations? And or are we just kind of, how much do we just mind our own business? What are your thoughts on some of that?
Well, our nation has historically intervened in a lot of other countries' inner workings for the benefit of corporations, and so in many cases we are actually causing some of the misery that is creating the conditions where people feel like they have nowhere else to go except to leave their country and go somewhere else. Nobody should take the position lightly that people just immigrate for on a lark. If you're going to ask yourself this: what would it take for you to give up your home, your neighborhood, your family, your job, and whatever else you have that is near and dear to you, and pick up and go to some other country where most people don't speak the language you speak, and and participate in a culture that you don't understand, knowing that you're going to be probably on the bottom rungs of that society? That's just not something that people do lightly. And so I as a senator, I would strongly suggest that we undertake a review of our policy through the lens of, are we making things better, or are we making things worse for the people in those other countries? we should make sure that our the Trump administration was very big on zero sum thinking. So in terms of trade deals, that would mean that we would try to get the best deal we could for Americans and the worst deal possible for the other country. But that's a zero sum thinking that I do not ascribe to. I am much more in the camp that if we can come up with fair agreements on trade, it benefits our country and the other country, and that has secondary effects that wind up benefiting the entire world. So I would like to review, our policies, and definitely we should not be supporting authoritarian regimes that terrorize their own citizens, because that just helps contribute to the problem of needing to emigrate in the first place. Given that, though, there are limitations. These are sovereign countries that are not America, and we don't have any right to simply go in and impose our will on people. To take the case of Venezuela, Venezuela, has been run into the ground by Hugo Chavez and now Nicolas Maduro, and it's creating terrible hardships for ordinary Venezuelans, many of whom have come here and are getting temporary protected status. There's not a whole lot we can do, in part because we don't have very good relationships with the Venezuelan government. They've been using us as a punching bag to explain why they have to do all these things, which wind up enriching a few and impoverishing the many. I'm certainly not advocating regime change, definitely not military action in that case, or in Mexico, by the way. So there we simply have to do the best that we can to deal with those who come to our border, and also to provide assistance to, I think it's definitely worth it to provide assistance to neighboring countries like Colombia, who are having to house and take care of the majority of Venezuelan refugees. It'd be much better to keep them down in South America, where they don't have to make as long a journey, and where it'd be easier for them to go back once the situation improves. But I don't see any discussion of that going on in our own media or foreign policy circles.
All right, one last question. There you are in Washington. You're the senator. And once again, the question of more arms for Ukraine, more arms for Israel. How do you begin to approach that?
So I would begin to approach it with just war theory, which is part of the American Solidarity platform. You have to look at what is the cause, and is the cause just? Is there a chance of success? Are the means being undertaken proportional to the ends? Do those match up? And in the case of Israel and Ukraine, I come up with different calculations. So Ukraine, as we know, is currently being occupied by a much larger aggressive country, Russia, and they are fighting to defend their own homeland. There is the Ukrainian army and the Russian army that are squaring off against each other, and so if you follow that line of reasoning, it's fairly evident to me, at least, that we are helping keep a sovereign nation free, and especially a sovereign nation that is interested in pursuing values and policies that are similar to our other allies in Europe. And so you can make a pretty good case for aid to Ukraine. If we look at the Israel-Hamas war going on right now, I think the case for Israeli aid is much weaker. Israel was attacked, but they're no longer being attacked, and so they are carrying out a campaign to eliminate Hamas. I don't think that you can really be successful with that unless you are willing to eliminate basically every man inside Hamas. If we've learned anything from the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, it's that if you try to replace a group through military force, eventually another group is going to come along that's at least as bad as the group you got rid of. 20 years of fighting the Taliban didn't get us rid of the Taliban and replacing it with a more benign group of people. Instead, they just waited us out. And we defeated Al Qaeda only to see them be replaced by ISIS, which used even more extreme tactics in pursuit of more extreme goals. So I don't see that this military incursion by Israel is actually solving their problems. We can argue about whether or not they have a right to do so, but in the end, exercising that right, I don't think benefits them, and it's causing civilian casualties, which, in my opinion, are out of proportion to the military goals that they're trying to achieve. So it's a much weaker case.
That's very helpful, Mark. Much appreciated. We've come to the end of the hour, and as always, we turn to prayer and we look to the gospel for the day. On leaving the synagogue, Jesus entered the house of Simon and Andrew with James and John. Simon's mother-in-law lay sick with a fever. They immediately told him about her. He approached, grasped her hand, and helped her up. Then the fever left her, and she waited on them. When it was evening after sunset, they brought to him all who were ill or possessed by demons. The whole town was gathered at the door. He cured many who were sick with various diseases, and he drove out many demons, not permitting them to speak because they knew him. Rising very early before dawn, he left and went off to a deserted place where he prayed. Simon and those who were with him pursued him, and on finding him said, "Everyone is looking for you." He told them, "Let us go on to the nearby villages that I may preach there also. For this purpose I have come." So he went into their synagogues, preaching and driving out demons throughout the whole of Galilee. Come, Lord Jesus, come. Thank you very much, Mark Ruzon. It was a pleasure to have you with us this morning.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Valerie.
Thank you. Yeah, it's great to have you here, but thank you also just for putting yourself out there. There's this comes at a cost, this willingness to run this race. So thanks for making the sacrifices that you're making. It's encouraging to everyone to see people willing to step up and do things and trust that the goodwill is weightier than maybe the outcomes or the costs that it might come with. So thanks for that encouragement and just your witness in that regard.
Adelante con juicio.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you.
I hope the results reflect the effort.
Have a wonderful day.
You too.
Hello, God's beloved. I'm Annabelle Mosley, author, professor of theology, and host of Then Sings My Soul and Destination Sainthood on WCAT Radio. I invite you to listen in and find inspiration along this sacred journey we're traveling together to make our lives a masterpiece and, with God's grace, become saints. Join me, Annabelle Mosley, for Then Sings My Soul and Destination Sainthood on WCAT Radio. God bless you. Remember, You are never alone. God is always with you.
Thank you for listening to a production of WCAT Radio. Please join us in our mission of evangelization. And don't forget, love lifts up when knowledge takes flight.